Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion on the first day of December. I couldn't quite picture the end of this year during it, and I'm sure many of you have felt the same way. It's been such an extraordinary year to get through, but we've made it to the last month. So I think that's something to pat ourselves on the back for. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I broadcast from today and pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. The land that I'm coming from is the land of the Wadawurrung people. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are watching us or watching me today live or on the replay, either through Facebook, LinkedIn or YouTube. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm going to do this by myself because I had a few reflections and learnings over the year that I wanted to share, but particularly because there were a bunch of questions that had been asked of me, and I thought it was a good time to kind of address them on this live. What I'd really love, though, is there's plenty of space in this session for you to ask questions or just even put topics in the comments that you'd like me to touch on. If there's something that you'd just like me to cover, stick that in the comments, and do that even if you're watching the replay, and I'll make sure I bank them and get back to you on them. So that would be great. Now, just before I go on, I'm just going to sort myself here so I can see that you're on and watching. So I wanted to start with a question that came through actually on my Instagram. And it came from Nick from the SAF Centre, which is a Sexual Assault and Family Violence Centre. I've been very fortunate to be a member of the community of practice that the SAF Centre run around primary prevention of violence against women. I've been in that group for just over 2 years, I think, and I have learnt so much. And it was interesting when I first joined because I actually felt a little out of place. I didn't see my workplace inclusion efforts as primary prevention against violence against women. And then it became pretty apparent that that's exactly what it is. Our gender equity work, a lot of our LGBTI work really do go a long way to addressing violence against women. And it's interesting when you think about it, one of the key drivers of violence is around gender inequality. And what we're doing in workplaces is creating or attempting to create equality. And the interesting part, I think, for me, goes into the question that Nick's asked. And she asked me, how do you continue to thrive and not just survive when you're doing this type of work? And that's almost the reason for me when it comes to workplace inclusion. The fact that in a workplace you can get access to people who wouldn't otherwise engage with gender equality, with LGBTI inclusion, with cultural diversity, whatever it is that your organisation's focusing on. You get people to the table, to the education table, who wouldn't be there otherwise. And they are members of sporting clubs. They are parents. They are members of other organisations. They're customers of other businesses. You can filter your way out. Your impact can be filtered out into the world around us, into community. And that's one thing that helps me continue to thrive in this space, because I can see the positivity of that. Even when I'm getting backlash and you're getting people that aren't engaging, you're getting people to that table who are learning something that they didn't beforehand, and they will then go and have those conversations further. So I like to think about one example where Joe Bangles and I were delivering diversity and inclusion. Thanks, Thomas. I'll get to your comment in a second. We were delivering LGBTI awareness training to a sporting club, and a local politician was in attendance. And after the session, where we'd gone quite deep, we'd shared a lot of our personal stories. We'd talked about some of the real impactful changes that we think sporting clubs can have or can make to create impact and create inclusion in their clubs. And we asked them what their main takeaways from the session were. And this politician's main takeaway was that he was going to try to stop using the word guys. And at the moment, that kind of deflated me a little, because I thought all this work we're doing, and that's what he's taken away from this. And it's not the first time I've heard that either. That's quite a common takeaway that people grab onto. But then when I reflected on that the next day, and he sent out a Facebook post talking about how he appreciated the training and that there was so much to learn in this space, it made me remember that snowball effect. That was one of the things that somebody mentioned to me when I first started in this space, that little change that he's going to make, he's going to have conversations about it when he goes and addresses and remembers and corrects himself. He's obviously posted that on his Facebook profile. That's that snowball effect that just keeps building, and that helps me continue to thrive, is that idea that you are creating impact even in small ways, and those small pieces of impact can end up being quite large and having that impact out into community. So Nicole, that's one of the ways that I keep, it's reminding yourself of your why. That's how I keep focused and keep thriving. One of the other ways, though, that I really focus on is remembering that people aren't necessarily, that most people aren't bad people, that most people are well-intentioned, and that they just need education. And reminding myself of that when I go into a situation or when I've come out of a situation that might have been quite difficult, that helps me thrive. Because it's really, we've had centuries and centuries of inequities. And so it's going to take time to shift that. But recognizing that actually the person sitting across from the table from me is not a really awful, terrible person. It's just that they weren't provided the right education or understanding in this space, and that it's our job to do that for them. And so that's probably the other bit that I hold on to. Now, let me look at some of these comments here. So Thomas said, as a D&I practitioner, it can be a challenge to successfully prosecute the value proposition of D&I, even internally. As a consultant, how do you pitch this to an organisation and then get them to pay for it? This is a fantastic question, Thomas. So the value proposition, it really, it's kind of the basis of what we're doing as consultants in this space. My answer to that is it's targeted to the organisation. So I will not take in a blanket approach to any organisation and tell them this is why you need to do diversity and inclusion. You have to find what are their motivators. You have to sit and listen. And so if I'm going in to an organisation and they kind of think they want to do some D&I, but they're not really over the line, or at least their executives or managers aren't over the line, I want to know what their main business issues are currently. So if their main business issue is retention of staff, then I'm going to show them how diversity and inclusion can positively impact that business issue that they're experiencing. If it's a poor culture, if it's lack of innovation, whatever it is, you can craft your D&I value proposition around that. And to me, that's way more successful. Yes, it takes more time. And as a consultant, you can't just go in and deliver a cookie cutter approach. It takes time to really understand where their main issues are, but also what's driving them to reach out to a D&I consultant. Is it that they've had pressure internally from staff? Is it customers, clients? Is it just because they feel like it's the right thing to do? If it is that they just feel like it's the right thing to do, then you have to even try even harder to find that those tangible efforts, because you won't get anywhere. They'll want to do one training session and then you're out. And as a consultant, you're not going to make much money doing that. So that's my answer to that question is find that targeted reason for them to do this work, link it to the outcomes, and really drive that home as your value proposition. I hope that answers your question a bit, Thomas, but feel free to put some clarifying questions on there if you want. Edwin has said, sometimes it's about sowing a seed. I love that. It's exactly what it is, just starting off that little snowball, just really getting people to start thinking differently. And something like, when I reflect on the guys thing, because it's always the thing people want to talk about, can I use guys or not? When I reflect on that, it actually is quite complex and can have such a broad impact on gender stereotyping. It's making people think about gender in a different way and challenging it in a different way. And it's something that people can all relate to because everybody uses the word. So it can bring the conversation in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I like the way you've articulated that, Edwin. Hey, Ainsley. She said she finds sowing a lot of seeds to make businesses see the value in disability. Yep, absolutely. It's a long sales process. That's something that I've learned this year is the sales process. Being in diversity and inclusion as a consultant, it is a long time frame. And I think it's particularly because you're having to do that piece at the start to really slowly and carefully build their knowledge and understanding as to why they have to do this work without getting people on the back foot or getting them defensive. So it does take a lot of skill and diplomacy to get there, to get to an actual signed contract. So yeah, I share that, Ainsley. So Chad said, Edwin, have you come across the Sky News coverage of the Safe Schools program? They have been critical of it. That's an interesting conversation. I was talking about Safe Schools just this morning. I'm not going to go into that because I'm not across that either, Chad, but I'd be interested to hear what has happened there. So as a clarification, Thomas has said targeted approach, understanding their motivations, understanding their challenges, how D&I can solve there if they craft the value proposition to them. Yep. That summarises it. That's what I was saying, and I'm glad that's been helpful to you. So I wanted to I better answer one of the other questions that somebody sent through, and it did come from Ainsley, who I notice is watching today, so I better not miss her out. And the question was about what is your opinion on gender reveal parties? And I certainly have a personal opinion on these, that they're just horrific. But the really saddening thing is they are becoming all of a sudden popular in Australia. It's been such an American thing, and now we're seeing this in Australia. Let's maybe give you some words when you hear people talking about having these kind of parties that might help shift in people's ideas around this. For starters, they are not revealing gender. The whole premise of the event is wrong. They are revealing sex, and even then they may not be getting that right, because people who are intersex exist, and you can't tell whether that what their sex is just by the ultrasound or whatever it might be, but you definitely can't tell gender. And so the whole premise of those events is completely misplaced and wrong. But the other real harmful part of those parties is the expectations that it places on that particular child by having this gender reveal, the reinforcement of stereotypes around pink and blue being the colours, and, the types of things, the types of gifts that you would give. It's just all awful and, makes me shudder every time I think of it. We don't want to be making gender the big deal. We need to start moving away from this back to times when gender wasn't as big a deal, and there have been times through history where it hasn't been the all-important question. Let's go back to thinking about whether the baby is healthy or not, as to whether they are a boy or a girl. So Ainsley, that's my answer to that. And you did ask another question too around the acronym and how to be an ally around the acronym. And I actually thought this was quite interesting, because I hear constantly people try to say the acronym, get it wrong, and then make some comment afterwards about why they got it wrong or how they got it wrong. It's okay to get, in my opinion, it's okay to get the acronym wrong. I'm not going to talk for all people who are LGBTIQA+. for me, I think it's okay to stumble over the acronym. I don't have a huge thing about it. I do, however, though, have sometimes hang up about it. And particularly in times where there is a senior leader or executive leading a meeting that might be around LGBTIQA plus inclusion, or introducing somebody who's going to talk in that space, then I think it's really important you get it right, because that does indicate your level of engagement and your awareness and understanding of the topic. And so I think there are certain circumstances and cases where it's important that you get it right and don't stumble. There are different acronyms that people are using, and that's totally okay too. The most inclusive one, I think, is LGBTIQA+, but there are other versions that are just as acceptable too. I think the important thing, though, if you're talking about inclusion work that you're doing in this space, only put the letters in if you're actually doing something about that. So if you're not actually doing anything in your LGBTI inclusion work that is focused on people who are trans, and you're saying that you are, and that this is LGBTIQA plus inclusion, then really you need to correct that plan and make sure you are addressing the experience and the lived experience of people who are trans. So one of the comments here, so Ainsley, please add any clarifying questions, comments if you need to. One of the comments here is from Emma. As a brand consultant, the overall purpose or proposition for the organisation is a great central point for a D&I proposition and can be a useful way to bring different areas of the organisation into the discussion and build from there. 100%. And I think there's so much. Let me clarify my thoughts here. When you get into organisations as a D&I consultant, quite often you're just exposed to the HR team or the people who are on the D&I advisory committee. And quite often I find that these committees haven't really thought through the different areas of the organisation that need to be at the table and involved. So some do, but not all do. So what I mean by that is, is there a representation from the IT department on your diversity and inclusion committee? Because so many of your solutions are going to be system-based or IT-based. If you have somebody who transitions in the workplace, how do the data systems, how do all the systems, the IT systems in the workplace account for that? If they're at the table, then they understand that that is something that they need to consider, and they can go out and create inclusion in that particular space. So I really resonate with that comment, Emma, that it is about showing that value proposition to the whole of the organisation and not just to a part of it, and build from there. Chad said, I think some journalists and news commentators have issues getting their heads around gender neutral. It can be very academic. So I guess there perhaps you're talking maybe about non-binary people and just trying to drop the gendered approach to life, which is what we see in the newspapers. And it's really quite, I don't know if anybody saw that Herald Sun article a while ago that it wasn't that long ago, actually, but it was basically said that now the football has finished. It's time to focus on the WAGs or something, and they've done this article on the WAGs of the football world. And it was like, hang on, there's some incredible sport going on right now that's being played by women. Why are we focusing on that? Why is that the news story? And why isn't it the fact that the WBBL's on and is creating a stir, or, all the other great sporting codes that were on at that time and could have featured in the sports section of the newspaper? There's too many print media that is just too far behind the times when it comes to gender and still really focusing there, and it's not fun. Thomas has said, putting the letters in if you're doing something about it, never thought about that, important. yeah, we don't want to be dropping off letters at all, but it's making sure that you're doing something about the people who are in there, the people who you are including. Now, the little clarifying comment here too is with the I for intersex. If you haven't gone on to the, I've forgotten the acronym, there's an intersex organisation that released a Darlington statement. If you search Darlington statement on Google, you'll find it. And they've talked about how they would like intersex inclusion addressed in organisations and in this inclusion work. And so you'll notice that a lot of organisations have actually removed the I from the name of their training programs. And that's out of respect for that statement and for the fact that we can't, if we don't have lived experience of being intersex, then we really shouldn't be providing training in that space. Or if we are including the I in our training, then that we're actually referencing the material that people who are intersex have developed and deliver. And so you can reach out to them for that specific training. So that's a good clarifying point. Tamsin's put that's right, IHRA, Intersex Human Rights Australia, I think is the group to go and find. And you can get lots of information there about how you can include intersex inclusion in the work that you're doing, because quite often that's a piece that is forgotten and definitely shouldn't be. And there was we had a bit of a discussion about that on Friday when I talked with Alistair Laurie on this program. That's worth catching up with. All right, so I just better cover off on my learnings, and please keep going with the comments. They're fantastic. So good to see you all engaging. My learnings from this year, this isn't an exhaustive list. This is just some that came up that I thought might be worth sharing, and some of you might have had similar experiences. One thing that I've learned is that executives and board members really engage with diversity and inclusion training when it is action focused. This isn't rocket science, right? But we know that they're about creating business change. That's quite often why people have made it to those positions in organisations. They know how to get stuff done. So rather than just going in and giving them a broad brush unconscious bias training or LGBTI awareness training, really workshopping with them how we create change in the organisation, how we operationalise this, how we create strategies around it. And that's been just so fun for me over this year to be doing that with executive groups. And just recently, Joe Bangles and I delivered our Linked Out program to the executive of NG Australia, and the conversation was incredible. It just gave me those kind of goosebumps that you're like, wow, they're really going to create change in this organisation because they're engaged and they're thinking about real actions that they can take, real meaningful actions. And so I think if you happen to be delivering inclusion training to leaders, or you're engaging somebody to do it, make sure there's some good action planning in there and some accountability to hold them to those actions going forward. Because if you can get their time to put their brains in this space, you can create a lot of change. The other thing I've noticed, and I must admit, I think I already knew this, but it's certainly crystallised it for me this year, is diversity and inclusion committees need upskilling. The suggestions, initiatives, the approaches that many of these committees are taking is outdated and sometimes just really uninformed or misinformed. They're not collecting and analysing data properly. They're not really aware of the best practice purpose, and quite often they don't have the authority or the power to really create the change they need to create anyway. How do we get them there? I think we upskill them, and I've certainly delivered some training this year to diversity and inclusion committees specifically, particularly around inclusive leadership, and how do we empower them to create the change that they want to see. They've already got the passion. That's why they put their hands up to get on that committee. But we have to skill them up as well so that they can hold the conversations with people that they need to, so that they can advocate, they can articulate the proposition, the value proposition of D&I. I still find most people on those committees, they can't do that yet. We need to train them to do that, and we need to train them to be able to recognise the barriers that do exist in their organisation, but also the enablers. And remembering that we have to listen to the people. It reminded me of one particular thing we did when I was at Deakin, and we actually got all the leaders, the women leaders in the organisation together, and we asked them, how did you get here? What was it that enabled you to reach leadership in this organisation? And the fascinating thing for me was that for such a large amount of them, it was that somebody pushed them. Somebody patted them on the back and pushed them. And so understanding that that's how the culture worked in that organisation then allowed us to really go, okay, so how do we foster sponsorship in this organisation? How do we really enhance that and promote that as a way of getting more diversity in leadership? So skilling up our D&I committees so they know how to find that information and then act on it, I think is just so important. And Thomas, more than happy to chat about that. It's something that I have really loved doing this year because it's, always a group of people who are so passionate. But we can create change if we just upskill them and get them to be able to put that lens on where they can see things a little bit differently. And they can really bring that business perspective to the work, because I do find that that is quite often missing, an inability to link this work to the business goals of the organisation and therefore really get things moving and create change. So more than happy to chat and reach out. Now, I've got 4 minutes left, so if you have got another question, place it in there and I promise to get to it. I'm just going to do a little summary of what I have been up to this year and what people can come and engage me for. So if you don't want to hear this little short sales pitch, you better get a question in. I have been doing, as I said, the training around inclusive leadership for people working in diversity and inclusion, but also for groups of managers and executives. The inclusive leadership online course I have, there's 12 people in it at the moment, and they seem to be, from the feedback I've received so far, they seem to be really enjoying it. And in a couple of weeks, we get together for our second live session, which should be a bunch of fun, because the first one certainly really challenged me, as all of these people have got a real strong interest in the inclusion space. The strategy work has been a lot slower to come on board. I started the business in February, but now it's happening. And the interesting thing, and it's one of the learnings I forgot to mention, was people forget that to develop a diversity and inclusion strategy, you do have to listen to the people first. You have to collect data, but you also need workplace data. And so starting at that data point with organisations has been really quite interesting to me, and also a little bit frustrating at times, to be honest. So a few organisations I'll get to, and they've done an employee engagement survey this year, but they didn't ask any demographic questions. So yeah, sure, 76% of their staff, whatever it might be, were engaged, but out of that 24% that's not engaged, who are they? They've got no idea. And what if they are all women or all LGBTIQA plus people or all people with disability? You can incorporate your inclusion. You should be incorporating your inclusion data analysis, data collection in your employee engagement surveys. And it really quite baffles me that that doesn't happen. And so what have I been doing? I've been working with organisations to develop surveys and focus groups and real community consultation stuff, workplace consultation, to get that data so that you can develop a strategy that's specific and targeted and is actually going to hit the areas in the organisation that you want it to hit. And of course, there's Linked Out, which Joe Bangles and I have been running. It's LGBTIQA plus awareness that really morphs each time we do it. It's about sharing stories and looking at case studies and scenarios. It's not LGBT 101. that is inside, you get that because you get that as an online course when you sign up to have the live training. But we really delve into what are the real challenges for people in this space. What don't you know about the lived experience of people who are LGBTIQA+. And that really has been probably one of the most rewarding parts of this year is delivering and developing that workshop with Jo. So it's 12:30. I'm done. Next week, we won't be doing this next week, but the week after I should have another fantastic guest. I think he said yes, so look forward to that. And then I'll be starting up again at the end of January, or mid-January, for these practical inclusions. So thank you so much for your conversations today and your engagement. And as always, this will go up on my YouTube channel with the captions later tonight, and you'll be able to share from there if you wish to. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your week.